The time has come for Satanism to rise up in challenge to superstitions, that which hinders the progress of science, and attempts to prevent everyone from enjoying the same freedoms. The time is now. Rise up and let your voice be heard. Idiot's rule has been the way for far too long. That soon will change.
Insurmountable odds.
You are tuned into modern Satanism.
Satan is symbolic of the eternal rebel in opposition to arbitrary authority, forever defending personal sovereignty even in the face of insurmountable odds.
The freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. The freedom to offend.
Help us to come to a deeper knowledge of Satan.
There are some in this room that are servants of the devil. Servants of the devil.
Servants of the devil. Servants of the devil.
Even in the face of insurmountable odds.
The views and opinions expressed on the program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the programs,
and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Satanic Temple.
I think that's probably my favorite intro so far. A little long, though. You're listening to Modern Satanism. I'm your host, Reap. I'm a priest with the Satanic Temple, but, of course, as you heard, the opinions expressed here don't necessarily represent the Satanic Temple, because who the hell would trust me to represent them? That would just be silly. I understand completely why someone wouldn't trust me. I don't trust myself sometimes. He said with a grin. Glad you found the podcast. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it very much. I enjoyed creating it, even though it took forever. It was worth every minute. We have Jesper Peterson, who joins myself, and Douglas Mesner, also known as Lucian Greaves from the Satanic Temple. Man, I learned a lot from Mark Dice. Thank you, Mark. Despite the fact that Skype let me down tremendously, and I'm still very hurt and personally offended by Skype, and I'm going to sue it for mental anguish, we overcame those difficulties, and I think that it turned out just fine. You might notice a few blurps here and there, but hey, nobody's perfect, especially not Skype. It's a good conversation, very informative, very, well, I don't know, I'm biased, so I'll leave you to judge it for yourself. Let's begin.
You are listening to the Modern Satanism podcast with your host, Reap.
Hello?
Hello, Jesper.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thanks.
Good. I have Doug on the line, too.
Great.
Hello.
Hi, Doug.
Good to speak to you.
Yeah, it is good to speak to you.
You too.
Sorry we're late.
No problem.
Technology gets like that sometimes. Jesper, if you could introduce yourself so that I don't get the credentials all messed up.
My name is Jesper Petersen, and I'm an associate professor at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim, Norway. And I've written a doctoral dissertation on modern Satanism a few years back, and have continued working on this subject from many different perspectives. So you could call me an expert on Satanism, I guess.
Yes, we would call you that, I think.
Yeah, I love your material, and I was wondering how you've come to contextualize the Satanic Temple and seeing what's going on in the media with us.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting development, actually, because I think it's it's a refreshing new thing that I've never seen before. If you look at what I call the satanic milieu, that is Satanism on a broader social level, with a lot of different groups and individuals and narratives and books and so on. You can see that many things have happened in the past 50 years, but I've never seen this combination of happening or prankster mentality with a very significant political engagement. Political not in party political engagement, but in a more what you call a philosophical sense, a sense of changing something that is unfair or changing something that doesn't work. And I think that's a new way of putting words and practice into Satanism, in contrast to what has happened before. So it's both a development I can see in a broader historical line and social line, and something very significantly new. That is a new way of being a Satanist and asserting yourself on the cultural and social level.
I'm wondering if did you foresee something like this happening with Satanism, or were you thought it would happen? From
ever since Anton LaVey died, I think that there's been a lot of possibility in this satanic milieu. A lot of different groups and a lot of different individuals have utilized the internet and new ways of making connections to try to establish something new. And of course, since 1997, the Church of Satan itself has discovered the internet and the importance of maintaining a presence. So I saw that something had to happen, because Satanism was in a way suited for this new, more network-like way of being. But at the same time, I did not see this translation of what I would call the Church of Satan's more carnivalesque or transgressive attitude into a political tool. And I think that's what is new and what is surprising, given the development of Satanism as such. Because what I've seen parallel to the rise of the Satanic Temple is also a rise of what I would call esoteric Satanism, or more, not traditional Satanism, but Satanism understood through the lens of Western esotericism and modern occultism.
Yeah.
So I think that those two developments are interesting and are both representing something that was underrepresented in the satanic milieu before.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the Church of Satan was a little slow to get on board with the internet.
True.
Yeah.
I think they had a couple of officers or members trying to do something in the mid and late 90s, but I think the website and the continuous presence and activity is something relatively new, and I think that has to do with Peter Gilmore reasserting himself and starting up a lot of new projects from around 2007 onwards with the High Mass in 2006 and stuff like that. He tried to revitalize the church and give it a more public presence, and I think he succeeded on one level. And I think the developments and the visibility of the two strands I mentioned before, the Satanic Temple and the more political Satanism in a sense, and the esoteric Satanism, are both a consequence of the Church of Satan trying to establish a dominance online.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you too. Do you have an opinion about Peter Gilmore? Is kind of lays claim to the word Satanism. You know, I don't know, and he's been kind of a little bit outspoken about the Satanic Temple, and I don't know. Yeah. It saddens me kind of, because I had a great respect for him.
Yeah.
And until he started becoming kind of I don't know what the word is I would use to describe him. He wants to claim ownership to it, but he doesn't have a right to claim ownership to it. It's too bad.
No, that's true. I mean, I wrote one of the chapters in my dissertation, and that was also a chapter in a book called Contemporary Esotericism, edited by a couple of my good friends. And in that chapter, I tried to examine Satanism online and try to make some more or less intelligent academic observations. And one of the things that was obvious was that the Church of Satan tried to use this exclusionary tactic that they had before the internet, but they reasserted it and fitted it to this new context and tried to do the same online, which is of course impossible because the internet is good for conspiracy and more roots-like developments, and not the propaganda medium that radio or books are.
Yeah.
So I think that.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello. Are you there?
Yeah.
Good, we got you back.
I gotta say, I'm not a big fan of Skype. I always have these problems with it.
That's okay. This will work okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I think from what when I've been talking to a lot of my contacts, both in Scandinavia and Europe and abroad, I think that a lot of people have been mystified by this knee-jerk reaction from the Church of Satan, because, as I said, this reaction is an ingrained reaction in the Church of Satan almost from the beginning, and they have used it as a powerful tactic of exclusion. But now, with the way, especially the Satanic Temple is trying to position itself, I think actually the Church of Satan has perhaps not lost members, but at least lost a lot of sympathizers who actually think that both the political ambition and the prankster mentality is kind of refreshing, because the Church of Satan has, in a sense, for these people, in a sense, been running around in circles for a couple of years. So this is a new and refreshing way of seeing things. That's what my contacts are saying.
Yeah.
So I think that it's not surprising, because that's the Church of Satan's usual mode of operation. But at the same time, I think that perhaps they were a bit quick to reject this on a level of looking at the Oklahoma statue, for example, and accusing the temple for pedophilia and stuff like that. I think that was a really bad strategy.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't think that was a good choice of words for Peter.
No.
Yeah, I felt that was beyond undignified. I didn't expect them to endorse us, because their whole function, at least for the past since I can remember, has been to maintain a monopoly on Satanism, the claim that they're the one true Satanist. So I didn't expect that we would get any support from them at any given point. But to go that low, I felt that was utilizing satanic panic rhetoric in a willingness to burn the entire house down, so to speak, if they couldn't be the sole proprietors.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I was surprised, and I think a lot of people, perhaps not members of anything, but with strong sympathies for these more political or social engagements of Satanism, was surprised as well. And I think that as I said, it's not surprising given their strategy for the past 50 years. But I think this is reinforcing a stereotypical assessment of anything that the church is viewing as a competitor. And I think that perhaps it has worked in the past with the more or less monological communication, but now with the internet and the network communication, I think that's a bad strategy and a bad way to proceed.
Yeah, because before this, he wouldn't even acknowledge any other satanic groups, right? I mean, he just kind of kept quiet and didn't really say anything about anybody.
It's actually that's an interesting question, because an ex-member of the Church of Satan once wrote that he considered the Church of Satan that the primary ideological move was enforced dogmalessness. That is, you could actually believe in anything as long as you didn't take the authority of the church and say anything definite. Yeah. And that's actually an interesting analysis. And I think in a sense that has worked for the church, both from the inside and on the broader level of the milieu, to maintain this sort of ownership due to age and size, without necessarily defining a single creed, in a sense, even though they of course have ideological statements, the 9 Satanic statements and the Satanic Bible and so on. They could at least give the individual member a lot of leeway. But at the same time, if you look at the rhetoric in, for example, the book The Church of Satan, or the biographies of LaVey, it's obvious that from the beginning they had this ambition of pointing to a lot of groups and calling them pseudo-Satanists or devil worshippers, and claiming this word Satanism for themselves. And that's of course an interesting and viable strategy from a sociological point of view. I think it's obvious why they're doing it, but at the same time, it's also obvious that it only works so far. I mean, at this point, I think the relative success, even perhaps, especially of course in the U.S., but also abroad, the Satanic Temple has had with these happenings or events or whatever they're called. I think they lost the chance of not necessarily building a bigger flock or anything, but at least acknowledging that other people have understood the basic elements of it. Because I think the Satanic Temple is actually quite close to at least what LaVey could sympathize with.
Yeah.
I think a lot of his actions when he was young and not yet bored with humanity, I think that was exactly the prank. And I think actually this prank with both an ideological commitment in it, but also a powerful transgressive energy that actually disturbed people, but at the same time hopefully made them think. I think actually he would understand this type of political engagement. But that's so, of course, only me. I've never met him. So.
Yeah. I would agree with that, though. That makes sense. I mean, it was kind of had a different feeling in the beginning, I imagine.
Yeah.
Than it did later on.
Yeah, well, I was saying before I got cut off I cut off from the call originally, but when earlier, I don't know how much you know about my background, but I for a long time sought out and talked to different people affiliated with Satanism, self-identified Satanists, and I really felt a strong affinity towards LaVeyan Satanism. And when I was much younger, I bought into that whole social Darwinistic context of everything. And it wasn't until Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, they released their books, and it seemed to make the Church of Satan, to me, far more irrelevant. It made it seem more like a throwback to the 60s. You had these atheistic movements fighting for their right and that type of thing. I also went to school and I learned more about cognitive science and evolutionary biology, and it corrected me of these notions of these kind of facile notions of social Darwinist, nature red and tooth and claw. I learned more about game theory, reciprocal altruism, and to me the overriding drive was to be the optimal person I could. Right? That was really the path. It wasn't so much about conflict for its own sake. It was really about finding the way I could most affect the world around me in a beneficial way. And that came to realizing that you do have to work with people. You don't cultivate psychopathic behavior. Glorifying serial killers is simply silly. They usually, they're on a destructive path. They fall apart. And it didn't change my affinity for Satanism at all, but it really changed the face of it for me. And I couldn't be sure at all when we were putting this out and we threw in words like compassion and empathy without a whole lot of opportunity to lend exposition to that, whether that would resonate for people who also had an affinity for Satanism. And I was kind of surprised at how well it worked for people and how seamless the transition seemed to be for people who also had been members of the Church of Satan, or considered themselves LaVeyan Satanists to migrate over to the Satanic Temple because it seemed to have all the elements that they were looking for.
Yeah.
I was wondering if that was surprising to you. I imagine that was one of the first things you recognized in the Satanic Temple, was that we were moving away from that rhetoric, or that Nietzschean rhetoric. But I completely agree, and I think you're right in mentioning or pointing out that it appealed to a lot of ex-members, because one of the things, for example, here in Scandinavia,
that people was a bit uneasy with was both the sort of what they perceived of Americanism, that is a rampant individualism and stuff like that, but also this Ayn Rand type of objectivist ideology that is cultivating the psychopath, as you say, in a sense, or the sociopath. And I think that an alternative that perhaps rearranged the elements, sort of took some of the elements that they had already put into place, but replaced them with the, for example, a more current science, as you say, more recent scientific developments. For example, is one thing that obviously is important, because LaVey only had access to whatever he had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when he established modern Satanism as in the Church of Satan. So, of course, things have progressed quite radically, and a lot of notions that he saw as scientific has been proven today to be soundly unscientific, because they are built on wrong assumptions or faulty empirical studies or stuff like that. So, of course, a lot of people were had problems with the Church of Satan, and especially in the mid-90s, around LaVey's death and the power struggles that happened after that. And I think that was that changed the face of Satanism into a more fragmented environment. And then after some years, of course, Peter Gilmore, he reasserted control and moved forward. And I think that what the Satanic Temple is trying to do, as I said, is of course you have your view of Satanism and your important basic building blocks. But what I was aiming at before was that I think LaVey he built up Satanism as he moved along. I think that has been proven by a lot of both academic studies and a lot of biographies. That I think he had some important elements, but he also established things in phases without necessarily planning it all out in advance.
Yeah.
And I think you can take and I think the prankster element, I think that is an important element from the beginning.
We will return to the Modern Satanism podcast after this word from our sponsor.
Satan!
We now return to the Modern Satanism podcast with guests Jesper Peterson and Doug Messner.
Also known as Lucian Graves.
There's people who think we're completely a farce and have no actual attachment to the satanic narrative. Insofar as presenting ourselves, and I love that people see that kind of prankster element in the fun, because it should be fun. But then you get these people thinking that that's all it is, and we have no actual attachment to Satanism, or you know, that Satanism part is completely arbitrary. Yeah. But as I was saying, though, I don't put too much time into the arguments, just because I feel that we'll be validated by what we do. That it'll be borne out as time goes on. I can see how many people this really does truly resonate for, and we're not going to leave them behind, and they're setting up their chapters. So it is kind of surprising, though, how much we have to explain the idea of atheistic religion, and
I was going to ask about that too.
Try to make us legitimate that, and it tells me that more people than I thought had no idea what the Church of Satan was about, or what they did, or what LaVey Satanism actually meant.
I lost the surprising bit at the end because the internet acted up again. But just to inject here that I completely agree without, of course, knowing what it's like from your end. Then what I see when I study the satanic milieu is that people are taking on the pranks in some people are focusing on the fun element. Some people are focusing on the social issues, and some people are focusing on the Satanism that is used to present it. And in all three cases, that can work as a positive or a negative thing for people. But I mean that is what it is. I mean that's usually the cases with complicated social arrangements that people have a lot of interpretation going on outside what you try to when you present yourself, of course. So I see that, and I understand that's the case with the reaction from the Church of Satan as well. They saw the fun aspect only.
Yeah.
So I mean, even they couldn't see beyond this prankster element. But when I must explain that when I'm using the word prank, I consider it a way of trying to express that usually a prank is much more serious than a joke. Usually the prank has a social transformatory effect to it. So that's why I'm using that word to actually try to distinguish it from being merely funny.
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to find words to isolate these social happenings that are both transformatory or revolutionary, but also using humor or surprise or subversion as well.
An element of humor, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right. I understand, and I wouldn't shy away from the word at all if it wasn't for the fact that so many people think that these terminologies are mutually exclusive, that something can't have a prankster element without being entirely a prank. Something can't be political without being entirely political, and therefore barring it from being religious, barring it from being anything else. And I think it's all of those things, and it's a very difficult thing for people to grasp a lot of times, is that it can have all these elements and those be equally valid amongst each other.
Yeah, I think actually that's after 4 years of studying the satanic milieu and trying to say something intelligent about it. Actually, that was one of my conclusions in my thesis, was that this play with gray, as I called it, and that could be, for example, when you're using fascist iconography or using prankster practices, or if you the very notion of a Church of Satan, for example, all of that are playing with the gray areas. And what I was surprised to find that a lot of actors in the satanic milieu was actually quite mature about these things and trying to philosophize around this fact that it could be all of them at once.
Yeah.
And that's why I ended up comparing Satanism and the satanic milieu, or the more mature or well-developed self-declared Satanists, with actors in parallel milieus that did the same kind of thing. For example, artists or political revolutionaries and stuff like that, who had the same complicated understanding of playing with gray or using ambiguous elements to construct ideology or whatever. And I think so I think that's very much to the point that you're trying that, and a lot of actors in the satanic milieu, from my perspective, are trying to do the same thing, but with, of course, not everyone is as successful, but that's one of the defining elements, as I could see in one strand of the modern religious creativity, that is actually playing with gray.
Now,
right. I feel, though, that even bringing up the word of prankster or pranksterism is going to lead to some point where I'm in a courtroom and the opposing lawyer is going to bring it up out of context and say that at one point in an interview I admitted that this was a prank.
Yeah,
I can see that happening.
Yeah, I understand, but then you can gently direct the judge to, for example, Nicky Vale's 2 books on pranksterism, and he will notice, hopefully, if he dares to read it, that actually well-developed political go for about as long as humankind. So it'll probably not be that kind of judge.
More than anything else.
I had a question. I'm going to go back to the Church of Satan because I have a question about them again. Do you think that the Satanic Bible limits the ability of the Church of Satan to be effective, if ever to change or to modernize? Do you think
that's also a good question that I've given a lot of thought, because on the one hand, as we were discussing before, I think that LaVey and especially, of course, the Satanic Bible is using what is elements of his time.
Yeah.
Philosophical fads and scientific
and some of the sexism too that comes into it.
Exactly. So of course on one level I think that it is a sign of its times, but on another level I think every every document, and if we're a bit sacrilegious, we could perhaps, even though it's not a Bible, we could at least understand it as a kind of scripture.
Yeah.
Is always reinterpreted into a modern age, and I think that the basic fact that it's still successful is speaking to the fact that the Satanic Bible is able to still attract interest and can be reinterpreted into a modern time, even though it's 50 years old. So I think that yes, to be stuck with the scientific conclusions or the artificial scaffolding that they build into the church, the Bible, I think that could be a restrictive element. But I think that the book understood as a statement and individual reader can act upon or reinterpret. I think it's easily the most successful document.
I'm wondering if Peter Gilmore would be comfortable with the idea that the Satanic Bible is kind of being interpreted or the same way as the Christian Bible is, because it's kind of the same thing, right? I mean, you have to apply the same.
Well, that depends. What I'm trying to I learned from Eugene Gallagher, a participant at the Satanism conference we had here in 2009, that scripture is a good word exactly because it sidesteps the issues of authority and channeling communication and just looks at it as more of an object. And I think from that point of view, as objects, I think they have the same function. Yeah. But I think we must accept at least the claim of both the Bible, Satanic Bible itself, and also most of the members of the Church of Satan, and even the culture as a whole, Satanic culture as a whole, that it's not a Bible in content or in reverence. Yeah. But I think from a functional point of view, I think it serves a similar function, and of course it's interesting that some members, perhaps more in the past, but some members of the Church of Satan was as dogmatic about the Satanic Bible as fundamentalist Christians are about their Bible, and that was of course a bit amusing.
I think there's still an element of that now that I see every once in a while.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and the way they regard Peter.
That's why we didn't have our 7 tenets engraved on the monument design for Oklahoma. And the reason for that was that we felt they should be amenable to change. Doesn't matter what they are. You know, we don't write edicts in stone. I felt that was kind of fundamental to our thinking, was that the written word isn't our authority so much as these governing values we have in general that are amenable to change themselves.
Yeah, I understand that, and I think that perhaps again, I think you have to understand the church and LaVey as children of their time, and I think that at that point in time in the late 60s, I think it was an important statement to have this Bible in a sense. It was a play with gray. It was both a mockery of the Bible, but at the same time it was an important ideological statement, but also in a sense somewhat of a prank. I mean, everybody looked at it and was dead scared, and during the 80s Satanic Panic, that book in itself was the only reason why uneducated police officers suddenly started calling things satanic crime or stuff like that, just because of the presence of that book. So I mean that was I think it was important, but also again you have to understand it from in the historical context, and I agree that the context changes over time.
But it would have been impossible, pretty much. It would have been almost impossible for them to get where they've gotten without the book. Without the book, they wouldn't have gotten anywhere, probably.
I agree, and I mean the interesting thing is from around 65, 66 when the church was established, and then on to 69 where the Bible 70 where the Bible was published. It transformed from this curious celebrity phenomenon, Californian celebrity phenomenon, into an international perhaps not a movement, but an international interest at least, because all of a sudden you had this one book, and that's important for any kind of new movement, that to have something that can focus your energy and your attention and get the attention of others. And I think that book, even though it's a hodgepodge and constructed as LaVey went along, I think it still had enough coherence. And what is interesting, and that's something I discuss in a number of articles, the interesting thing is that the book in itself contains elements that are interesting to everybody. Yeah. So you have this very, very transgressive and anti-Christian book of Satan in the beginning, which appeals to the more oppositional or groups, and then you have the very intellectual book of Lucifer, and then you have the magical material in the end, which appeals to the more esoterically or occult inclined people. So this book is actually a beautiful instrument of recruitment, because it appeals to very different types of Satanists.
Well, the biggest confusion now, it seems, and it's a confusion I don't think the Church of Satan has fought through or articulated at all, and I think maybe it's because they don't want to alienate certain populations of their market, is really their stance on supernaturalism. I've been clear that we don't endorse, the Satanic Temple doesn't endorse any supernatural explanation. My feeling is that the spiritual practices, if you want to call it that, are really up to the individual in the group. And, I mean, look at the Christian group and ask yourself what Christian spirituality is. And, I think our focus is to a more modern religious structure. But in any case, I see these comments from people on who are members of the Church of Satan or followers of the Church of Satan, advocates for it in any case, and they'll claim that the Church of Satan is really the atheistic secular group that we're pretending to be, that they've always been anti-supernaturalist. And I wonder where they really get that idea, and I don't really see evidence of them dismissing the idea that we must acknowledge magic or lose everything that magic has gained for us, which is within their, I believe it's the 11 laws of the earth, or whatever, or these biographical claims that LaVey had made about working magic in such a way that
having an effect on the world,
or cause the death of the lion tamer in the zoo that is lying from it. And I wonder, I was just wondering if you had any more insight on that. If I'm just confused as to what kind of fiats they've released and haven't found the proper material, or is there really this kind of confusion that they're displaying themselves where I'm correct and they really have to take just a strong stand correct people on what they're actually
it's difficult for me to speak with authority on internal philosophical matters, but I wrote an article on satanic magic a while back, where I tried to discuss what I called a scale of approaches to magic within Satanism, from the entirely secular and atheistic rejection of anything supernatural, and to the what I call the esoteric Satanists that appropriated traditional occult technologies like astrology or alchemy into their
New Age version.
Yeah. And of course, I think again we have to return to what I spoke at length about before, and that is the play with gray. I think on one hand, I think it's obvious that and I've made that claim numerous times. I think it's obvious that LaVey was a member of what we call the cultic milieu of the 60s, the 50s and 60s. Yeah. He was an active seeker in the 50s and 60s, and of course the church in their biographies and their narrative about themselves, they explain that as this kind of critical, almost like spy-like traveling around the occult milieu and taking whatever appealed to him, but he was not interested in any of it on a more fundamental level. And I think it's only appropriate to question this narrative, and I think from what he has written and that story in itself of LaVey as an active seeker, I think that speaks more obvious that the Church of Satan again has has a very interesting, and at least on the top level, I'm not speaking about any individual member here, but LaVey and his the leadership had accusation of magic, which LaVey proposed in the Bible, but especially in the Satanic Rituals, the book, the Satanic Rituals. I think that is, on the one hand, he copied strategies that was being used around him in, for example, neo-paganism or the early New Age milieu. That is, magic is about psychology. It's about biological instincts that manifest in the world, but in a non-supernatural way. But at the same time, I think we must. I at least think that we have to give some credit, because he, in a sense, he inverted that as well. Instead of just transforming magic into psychology, there was an interesting gray area there. I'm almost quoting him verbatim here. Yeah. An interesting gray area between psychology and magic that could be used. And I think that's why I called, and that perhaps that's a bit overcomplicated, but I called the strategy that the Church of Satan used esotericizing the secular. That is, the basic elements of the Church of Satan, or LaVey's ideology, was secular, but he actively expanded this secularism with esoteric trappings, esoteric ideas.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
And kept them, the traditional movement, for example, with more groups, both in cities but also in the broader milieu, they did the opposite. They secularized the esoteric. So they made esoteric component as the baseline, but then they, of course, secularized it in order to interpret esotericism into the 20th or 21st century. Yeah. So that was at least what I concluded in that article about magic. That once again I had to acknowledge that perhaps LaVey had this interesting twist to it, but perhaps that's just me reading way too much and seeing something that's not there.
I've gotten messages though. I've known some of LaVey's personal friends, and I got a message at some point from one of his more prominent, closer friends who stated that he felt that the old man would be proud. Do you find that surprising?
No, I think that's. I think you would, and I think there's a big difference between the Church of Satan today and Anton LaVey, even though it has been described as a personality cult and stuff like that. I think he was on one hand, I think he was human, very, very human. So he had his problems and his likes and dislikes, but at the same time, I think he would have understood and applauded this the in-your-face attitude. I think that the young LaVey exhibited the same kind of strategic, provocative attitude, and so I think that the Church of Satan itself and of course the early activities was comparable to what the Satanic Temple is trying to do today. Yeah. That is, affect things not just in a minor sense as affecting a few religious people in California or in the USA, but actually trying to do something about society. And I think if you look at I think you mentioned earlier the pentagonal revisionism program of LaVey, where the first point is of course social stratification, that is social Darwinism. Yeah. And you can agree with that or not, but he actually. If we take that seriously, I think we must acknowledge that he actually had this in the original Greek sense of the word, this political understanding of his practice, that it had an effect on society, or should have an effect on society.
Yeah, I agree.
You are listening to the soothing sounds of modern Satanism. Soothing.
Jesper, are there other satanic groups or organizations that you think are making a mark or doing progressive things or contributing? Because I don't hear a whole lot about other groups.
I think this combination of religious criticism or atheism, this new atheism in a sense, or at least some of the elements from that, and the progressivism and the use of these. How should we put it? Not softer words. That's perhaps a problem, but as you say, compassion and stuff like that into the vocabulary. I think that's new. The only I did, of course, because that's where I started. I did a lot of work on a Danish group that was quite successful in this local area in Denmark, but also affected other countries in Scandinavia as well. They had some points of similarity, even though they didn't have that courage to actually try to do pranks on a large scale or happenings on a large scale. I think their combination of Satanism with active work, they had some similarities, and of course they were also ex-members of the Church of Satan, most of them, and they took some of the elements from LaVey's understanding of Satanism, but also combined them with what they considered working aspects. Yeah. Most of them were well read in physics and biology and modern philosophy, and corrected a lot of aspects they thought were old-fashioned in LaVey, and they combined it also with a more with an attention, a much more open engagement with society, because they understood that to be a Satanist you had to engage with people who misunderstood you, because if you didn't do that you would be imprisoned. Or at least misunderstood. And so instead of complaining about being misunderstood, you should actually participate in radio shows or television shows or some media, and stuff like that. So I think there was some, but of course this was a pretty local affair in Scandinavia and in Denmark especially. But they had some of the same understanding. I don't know. I'm actually interested in one thing. And that is, as far as I understand from interviews I have seen and read, you are actually able to you have some ideological freedom within the Satanic Temple as a member. Is that correct, or at least as an affiliate?
Yeah, there is a lot of freedom. That's one of the reasons that's what drew me to it, actually, was that, because I've always been kind of isolated, kind of just done my own thing by myself, just kind of done what I thought was right. But when I came across the Satanic Temple and met Doug, that something rang red there that was missing from the Church of Satan, because I didn't like the Church of Satan's attitude of selfishness, I didn't like the selfish aspect of it, and that's what kind of kept me from it. That, and because I don't want to be chained to a book. I really have a problem with being chained to a belief system that's written down and you have to follow it, kind of. Yeah.
Because the reason why I ask is because that's similar to this Danish group I'm talking about. Because they actually called themselves the Satanic Forum, because they tried to underscore the fact that they were an umbrella organization with pretty wide boundaries. Even though there was a lot of people they didn't want. The people that gathered in this under this umbrella was not in agreement on everything. So they tried the same thing with making this what they call a forum and trying to at least advocate a few common goals. Survival and trying to change society into a more satanic-friendly environment. But other than that, you could actually believe in a lot of different things.
Yeah, I think that the having the basics, and the basics being equal rights for people, are things that you can get most people to agree on. I think that's what the Satanic Temple's done very well. Is base themselves on things that are, against racism and equal rights and tolerance and an equal playing field for religious consideration of religious organizations.
I have to say, I think the equality argument has always been confused by simpler minds when the argument is never that people are all of equal ability. It's just that people are equal in the eyes of justice. Nobody can commit wanton murder everybody's allowed equal access to resources.
And you shouldn't be
Only
discriminated
then,
against for the way you're born. Yeah.
Right, but you can't argue for meritocracy and against equality, and that's sometimes a simple-minded argument I see from the really kind of narcissistic, selfish crowd that puts forward this really simplest view of Ayn Rand and Nietzscheism. They pretend that the argument is that we're all of equal worth and equal ability, and therefore you have these kinds of privileges due to you based on whatever. I don't know how it breaks down to the moronic mind, but that was never the case. And as I said, I just don't feel that you can argue meritocracy and argue against equality at the same time.
No, I see that, and I think that what again, perhaps I'm turning into sort of a LaVey fanboy here, even though I'm not a member of any church or.
Oh yeah, I wanted to make that point too. Yeah.
But I think I have to again. I think he was, and if you read not just a few texts, but if you actually try to get a breadth of information, I think I was surprised to see that he was perhaps an old grumpy guy, but you have to understand. Most people fail to see, and I'm not talking about you, but on a more general level, fail to see that this guy he wrote and discussed things over a long period of time. And people have a tendency of associating elements from very different time periods as being equal, and I think that's what happens. I think on if you read the Satanic Bible, I think you can get a lot of equality out of that if you want to.
Yeah.
Then I think he developed a misanthropic streak, perhaps because of the schisms in the 70s or the satanic panic of the 80s, but whatever happened, he got much more
cynical.
Yeah, and then he started reinforcing things, and I think of course, from an ideological point of view, you have to read these documents side by side. But as a historian, I have to emphasize also that these are documents from quite time periods, and I think what happened with I think LaVey was fed up with the kind of equality that he saw in the hippie movement around him.
Yeah.
But I think for example, his sexual morals, he accepted as one of the first guys, from as far as I can see, he accepted asexuality as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, he had some sort of understanding of birthright in a sense. And
right. I should explain too that I see, I find myself justifying my differences from LaVey's material and the Church of Satan. But I should also make it clear that I was really coming from a place before I got here from being a student of LaVey. I felt that was a starting point for me, and this is a direct evolution of that, just the same, despite my departures.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I think it's interesting the way the passing of Anton LaVey kind of helped to create these fragments or branching off of Satanism, kind of.
Yeah. That is interesting, and I think that's that's what motivated me in the beginning, because I started working on this around 2000. So I was in the middle of this explosion of new groups and a sense of freedom, and especially because of this combination of a very visible and very galvanizing personality that all of a sudden he disappeared, and then you have the internet as well.
I gotta say, the internet.
What?
The internet was a strong force too. I mean, with the two combined was kind of a.
Yeah, I think that made a very that created a situation where a lot of people could for good and bad, of course, because at that time in the around 2000 there was a lot of individuals with who pretended to be large groups as well, and that's one of the reasons why I think the Church of Satan they reinstated their bunko sheet from one of their older books and put it online, because it was a clear statement in the early days of the Church of Satan trying to say that Satan was something wrong with the church. Yeah. Everybody else was just imitators or devil worshippers, and I think they got caught in that because what is interesting, and I think I forgot to mention that during this interview, what is interesting is that the Church of Satan has always appropriated people they thought were important for Satanism, even though they didn't call themselves Satanists. So they have been doing this double strategy of both exclusion in the present day, but also a lot of inclusion back in history.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting, because I think when if you look at the present situation with some different glasses on, I think you could see a lot of people that you could associate with. So I think that they got caught in their own exclusivity, in a sense.
Kind of.
And as I said, I think that had an effect on the people who stayed in the Church of Satan, as opposed to all the different groups that left around LaVey's death. Yeah. I think that changed the church, even though it moved away. From my perspective and my informant's perspective, they were talking about this Nazi chic and fascist chic in the 80s and 90s as one of the reasons why they perhaps gradually moved away from the Church of Satan. But I think the curious thing is that them leaving the church and LaVey dying actually changed the church away from that as well. Yeah. I think there's a lot less fascist chic or Nazi chic in the church today than compared to perhaps 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting in itself, that of course the strategies of the members and then of course the strategies of the church as a whole changes over time as it should. So it is trying to adapt to new times. But I really do think, and of course I have no authority to say anything about what the Church of Satan should do or should do as a scholar. But I from a more personal perspective, I was not surprised about their reaction to the Satanic Temple, but I think they judged prematurely, and I think a lot of members, even within the Church of Satan, is less antagonistic to the Satanic Temple now as time has passed.
Yep.
And I think they reacted a bit quickly, because I have to be careful not to make a mistake, but it was also the Satanic Temple who did that homosexual wedding on top of the gravestone, right?
Yeah. Yes, it was.
I think is that true? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the early happenings, and I think that looked at from on an isolated as an isolated incident. Of course, could easily be that's just pranksters or morons using Satan as a kind of a shield. But then as more and more things, more and more happenings arise, I think you have to accept the fact that you have to reorient your interpretation of even the earlier events. But of course, I'm talking to perhaps you're just making it up as you go along as well, just as LaVey did.
Right. Well, it might be interesting for you to know what our demographics are, and of course, I try to figure it out too. But we do get a lot of messages from people who either migrated from the Church of Satan, they say they've given up on it, or people who even hold the dual affiliation, which I don't have a problem with, but I'm sure
Peter's
I'm not sure, but I imagine the church probably would. Yeah. They would probably be upset to know that. But we get a lot of that, and I haven't really gotten a firm grasp on who we appeal to, but it seems like I imagine we have more female appeal than the church does.
Seems to be strong.
Was mingling with the Church of Satan crowd, it seemed like it was a lot of Midwest middle class white males, and I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe it's our pro-choice campaign, but it seemed earlier than that. Even we were attracting a lot of female support, kind college age, judging by the people purchasing our merchandise, their names and their addresses, and you know, a lot going to college dorms and that kind of thing, to now I get a lot of fan mail from middle-aged women as well. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but I even got a message from a mother not too terribly long ago saying she was glad that the kids had somebody like me to look up to.
Nice.
I thought that was a rather remarkable message to get, being a leader of a satanic organization.
Yeah, that's a bit surprising. I must admit, I would have been surprised as well. But of course, perhaps that has to do with this the factor that again to invoke LaVey, he talked about this 9 parts social respectability and 1 part outrage. And I think perhaps a lot of people forgot that. And I when I view the Satanic Temple, and of course that's from the outside and just through the media, I see an attention to this balance as well, but at the same time, of course, with a bit more outrage, as with the original church. Of course, the original Church of Satan had more outrage than social respectability. But this balance, and I think that when I read interviews and see media interviews and talking to you now, of course, as with almost all my informants, you are a well-spoken and reasonable guy. So I mean that's the
he is well-spoken.
The outrage of and the progressivism and the happenings in it are doing their thing, and at the same time you can you have a certain composure and a certain way of explaining yourself that of course well, it is a bit of a surprise perhaps for people, because they still associate Satanists with cannibalism and animal sacrifice and stuff like that. So I mean, just by being by taking a bath and not using swear words and stuff like that, you can actually surprise a lot of people. Oh, sorry.
Well, I think there's actually no small population, though, of self-identified Satanists who actually worry about redeeming the name, actually wanting it to be associated with that kind of fear of infant sacrifice, cannibalism, those kinds of things. And it's just a label they can put on themselves to scare their neighbors or upset their parents, and that's what they want it to be and want it to stay to be. But, you know, even though I say I'm a product of LaVey, I'm also a product of the Satanic Panic. This was something that really I was aware of as a child and took seriously because I was a kid. You see these things around mainstream news, the ideas of satanic cults running around murdering everybody and committing these crimes. And to me, it's still fresh in my mind because I went on to take on the idea of the therapeutic process of recovered memory therapy that was largely responsible for the panic, and putting myself in direct opposition with these therapists who still operate and do these things today. So to me, it's no small issue, and it's really vital that people understand social movement in general and realize the limits of social movements to act in an antinomian fashion, to the point where, you know, the claims they were making during the Satanic Panic, even the ones that weren't supernatural, were really impossible from the perspective of social movements at all. You're not going to find that kind of parallel society that large, acting that egregiously against the common morality and all remaining silent on it. It's just not going to happen. And I think people need to understand that, or we're always going to be subject to these kinds of ignorant witch hunts. And it's still terrifying to me how few people realize that a witch hunt, a literal witch hunt, happened in the United States and the UK and maybe other territories within, you know, at least my own lifetime, and not the distant past.
Absolutely, I agree, and actually, that of course, even though my focus was on self-declared Satanism and self-declared Satanists, of course, I had to do a lot of work on the Satanic Panic as well, and what surprised me was the easy way in which religious and secular actors converged and moved ahead without even questioning the assumptions of their partners in crime, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, without even a moment's confusion, these fundamentalist Christian actors and secular agencies could actually work together without a shred of evidence, and that was surprising. And I must admit that looking at even though it's on a smaller scale, then the appeal of conspiracy theories today has a similar ring to it. I mean, the willingness to accept incredible claims from just on the face of it, and I think that's very surprising. Of course, you have to be critical because a lot of manipulation is happening, but to focus on alien probes or mind control through vaccine programs and stuff like that. That's just removing attention away from the serious social issues.
Yeah, it's harmful.
And
I like to show people the relationship between alien abduction and satanic ritual abuse, in that the quality of evidence is exactly the same. Most people are happy to reject alien abduction claims, but they still hold to this notion that people can recover memories of mundane abuse, yet they need to recognize that there's no dividing line between the two. You can't just say because one type of recovered memory is plausible within what we know in the real world is some type of abuse or some type of in a ritual setting, that it's any better qualitatively than the alien abduction narrative.
That's true, and actually an interesting aspect in terms of my own research is that most of the scholars who are active within Satanism studies today, we started off disbelieving or was interested in these claims at first, and then of course we gravitated towards understanding, well, that who are these Satans then? If we can just disprove all of these mythologies and imaginations, who are the real Satanists? And then we starting to do an ethnography on self-declared Satanists, and actually it affected a lot of us when we started off around 2000, because then we had to be somewhat apologetic and be very attentive to these counter-cult claims and anti-cult claims at the time. And we had to be extra careful not, for example, to reinforce any notion of slippery slopes. So just by reading a Dungeons & Dragons book, you got into child sacrifice and stuff like that. And now, 15 years later, we're a couple of scholars right now starting to go in the other direction. That is, moving back towards a softer version of the slippery slope, in the sense that it is interesting how many people started off with role-playing games and metal music and an interest in this culture moving into Satanism, but of course without that panic superstructure of them saying then you're inevitably lost. But we're actually, after so many years, we're now only trying to do sociology on these recruitment tactics and priming tactics of popular culture. So that's also an effect of satanic panic. It has affected the way we did research.
Yeah.
You know, another side of that, though, I kind of think the academic exploration of Satanism and in that kind of apologetic nature in showing that it's not all these things it was claimed to be during the Satanic Panic, has somewhat buffered the Church of Satan from some of the harsher criticisms I think they would have received with the Nazism, you know, the affinity for fascism and the fetishization of authoritarianism, and a lot of these writings that seem to lionize past dictators and this type of thing. I think then that those are overlooked because people then tend to go the other way and look at the positive aspects and say, well, they're not this and they're not this. Yeah. And I see a lot of that kind of confusion in comments. I look at some of the comments in articles related to the Satanic Temple, and people will say, well, the LaVeyans are really these kind of free-spirited hippie types, and they'll go on. And I think, I really wonder where they got that notion. I think it's just kind of going too far in the other direction. I think it's interesting. A lot of the criticisms directed related to that, I don't agree with. Who was it? Matthews in his book Modern Satanism, I think, got to the point of shrill at points where he was talking about the Nazi aesthetic, the fascist aesthetic being used, or aesthetic fascism, as I believe they called it. Yeah. And I'm not as hard on them about that. I feel that resonated with a certain crowd that embraces blasphemy, and nothing could have been more blasphemous at the time. And I feel like some people took on that imagery, and they genuinely weren't putting forward that ideology. They were embracing blasphemy of it. You know, you can argue how well you think that works as a tactic, or how intelligent that is, but I really don't doubt that some of these people really didn't have white power or Nazi inclinations, but some of them do, you know, and some of them gravitate towards the organization. But it's funny to me how much that hasn't been talked about in a lot of circles.
Yeah, I think you're right in pointing out that's an effect as well of the early scholarship being pretty careful about investigating stuff that or proposing stuff that could get Satanists into more trouble. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm glad that you complicated your own argument by pointing out this play with gray, the ambiguity of using Nazi aesthetics or fascist aesthetics, and that for a lot of Satanists at the time it was a tactic of even perhaps a stylistic choice if they were in that direction, or an oppositional or blasphemous move, as you say, a transgressive move, because now Satan is not working anymore. Now we have to, or that's too dangerous. So let's move to the lesser evil, the Nazi instead, because that's still pretty provocative, but in another direction. And to just equate that with ideological Nazism or fascism is just missing the point. And I think that it goes back to what we spoke about earlier with the way of understanding ritual, the way of understanding magic, and the way of understanding the power of the ambiguous and the power of playing with gray. And I think that Chris Matthews' book has actually a lot of value in it, but the chapters on where he's evaluating aesthetic fascism is not just wrong. They're really, really problematic from a scholarly point of view, in my opinion, because he's doing what I was talking about before. He's taking completely unrelated documents and documents from very different time periods and putting them together to make one argument. And I think that's one of the most dangerous things you can do if you have to represent something at least faithfully,
accurately.
The association with this aesthetics, I think a comparable case can be made for the neo-folk movement, because most of the neo-folk people are interested in fascism and the Nazi aesthetic from a purely aesthetic point of view. Yeah. But at the same time, they are getting banned from a lot of concert venues because people think they are Nazis, all of them. Yeah. But most of them are actually left-wing people. So I mean, you have a comparable attitude there, and as you said before, of course, as an outsider, you can question the success of a strategy that's just making you unwanted everywhere. Perhaps that's what you want, but if it's not what you want, perhaps you should change something.
Don't be surprised by the effect it has if we pick that style. Yeah. Now,
so can we expect another Modern Satanism academic compilation of essays from you?
If you can expect one, is that what you asked?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm in the early stages of doing an even larger volume with the same co-editor Per Faxner from Sweden. And this time it will be an even more expensive, unfortunately, volume from an even smaller academic publisher. But there's a Dutch publishing house called Brill, and they're doing a very, very interesting series of handbooks. They call them handbooks, but this has nothing to do with an easy access handbook. It's a handbook that's a euphemism. But they're doing a series of handbooks on different phenomena, New Age and New Paganism, and they asked me and Pierre if we could do one on Satanism and the Left Hand's Path. So we're trying to do one that's both interested in contemporary Satanism as a broad phenomenon and the more esoteric groups that I was talking about before. But we're in the planning stages. I think we have about 15 contributors that are willing or interested to participate. So it'll take a couple of years. But yes, then. But if you haven't seen it, because it's a pretty small academic publication, I edited a special issue on Satanism of a journal called the International Journal for the Study of New Religion. And actually, the contributors there were very interesting, and the contributions there were very interesting. I wrote a piece on Satanism scholarship, but then two scholars worked on Satanism and feminism, or the Satanic Feminine.
Oh, yeah.
And two other scholars worked on ethnographies of fringe groups, smaller, weirder. And
That's
I think it turned out pretty well as a small collection of articles to supplement the Devil's Party anthology.
How recent was that? On the feminism?
The special issue?
Yeah.
The special issue, I think it was early 2014. I think it was published in December 13 or January 2014 or something. So it's relatively recent. But actually, I think this is perhaps off topic. But if you send me an address, I can give you a physical copy, because I got a lot of editors' copies.
Oh, awesome!
So if you haven't got it, I can send it to you.
Yeah, I'll get you the address. I'd be interested in that. The feminism is strong now. The feminism movement has come back, it seems, here in the States, coming back strong.
I think it's interesting in relation to what Doug said before about perhaps there being more female members or more vocal female members. And I think Per, he just finished his doctoral thesis on satanic feminism. From a historical perspective, he studied 18th and 19th century literature.
So the French too, right, would be part of that.
Yeah, but actually in that special issue, he has an article about the satanic feminine in a contemporary setting, because he actually interviewed, I think, 25 female Satanists.
Oh wow! Okay, cool.
Around the globe, but mainly in Europe and the States. So he actually had some inside knowledge on these very different ways these women verbalized or vocalized their Satanism.
I think that was good hindsight. I mean, I think he had a good idea of what was going on, because it's absolutely a strong movement right now. So So we got a little bit ahead of it from what I've.
Hopefully, I mean, it's always healthy. Then we're back to the equality in a sense. It's always healthy for any group to represent represent society in a sense, and I think any gender inequality. I mean, it's the same in some neo-pagan groups where it was almost no men. I think that had a disadvantageous effect as well.
Yeah. Now, do you see any limitations to Satanism? How far it can go? How far do you think it can go? I should say.
As a social movement.
As a social movement, yeah.
I think there's of course a basic point that has to be made, that you can only go so far when you're allied to the opposition in that sense. I think the word will always create some problems, but most of the Satanists that I have talked to are very well aware of that and not interested in any kind of global satanic.
I haven't heard that either. Takeover.
That's not their interest anyway. So why should they change? And I think, perhaps that's a bad conversational strategy. But I think again, if we look at what LaVey said already in the 60s about this being a satanic age, I think that point is no less relevant today than it was in the 60s. I mean, on many levels we're living, or at least in some parts of the globe, we're living in an even more satanic age today than 50 years ago. So right. I think that certainly I don't think I'm not one of those people who think that it was LaVey's doing, because I think
isn't that kind of like them giving credit to people that they thought were Satanists but weren't officially Satanists in the line? Kind of same thing,
exactly.
Right?
And at the same time, I think one of the things that I laughed so hard when I read in one of the biographies of LaVey, where he claims ownership of the human potential movement at one point, saying that was all he's doing. Well, that's quite absurd when you know something about New Thought and all of that type of spiritualism in the United States. I think it's a pretty surprising statement to make that it was all LaVey's doing. But that aside, I think that certainly the basic fact that Satanism arrived so powerfully on the scene and was allied to a lot of what we could call satanic or diabolical coolness at that time. I mean, it was, if you look at the movies and the television shows and literature and everything in the 60s, there was this devilish chic, in a sense, that LaVey utilized for his own, but it also existed before him, and I think it now exists. As before, it exists outside the Church of Satan as a cultural force, and I think that when you ask about the future of Satanism, I think as a religious group or as a social movement, I think that the future is that depends on the members' ability to steer clear of the mistakes that were done in the past. But I think as a cultural force, I think it has a lot of success already, and you can see that because it has an effect. That's my statement in the introduction to my thesis. I claim that the reason why it's important to study Satanism from an academic point of view is not because of the size of this movement, but it's because of the symbolic effect that it has. It's much larger, the symbolic effect, than the individual membership should indicate.
Well, that's why I think Revolt of the Angels by France is such a foundational allegory for us. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book, but the narrative is that they're going to take up the war on heaven again, or some of the assembled fallen angels go back to Satan, and they propose that they take up war with Jehovah once more because he's gotten stagnant, old, and unwise to the ways of modern warfare, and that they will surely crush him. And Satan meditates on this for a night, and he dreams that this happens, that they overcome the dominant power, that they cast Jehovah down, and that many years pass, and as they do, Satan himself becomes more and more sick with the power and becomes exactly the type of tyrant that Jehovah was. And he decides that he doesn't want that, and they won't do that, and they'll just always be there as the kind of
to be
minority outcast to challenge the dominant power on individual things or whatever, and that's kind of the status I think we'll always have. We'll always be kind of a more marginal group that can, however, significantly challenge the dominant power.
Yeah, I've of course I think that's a part of the useful heritage, and that's not my evaluation, of course, but most of my informants that are outside the Church of Satan, that's part of the useful heritage from the day. That is the codification of always being in opposition. That is, instead of impersonating this particular opposition, for example, an anti-Christian stance, then you always have to be in opposition, always have to see this third side. And I think that's one of the things that I notice most Satanists outside the Church of Satan still find useful in the work of LaVey. That is, perhaps he was not very successful in doing that himself, but at least he codified this notion of Satanism not reifying into a simplistic set of positive and negative values, but always trying to negotiate
as an adversary.
Adversary to the current hegemony, whatever that was.
Yeah.
So in a sense, to be a Satanist today, that depends, of course, on your local environment as well, because, of course, the world is a diverse place, and there's many ways to be satanic. But in a sense, with all the wellness and shallow spirituality out there today, that actually points to an adversarial mode of hard scientific skepticism and stuff like that being a satanic stance today.
Yep. Well, fellas, I hate to cut this off because I'm enjoying the conversation, but I have to go to work.
All right. Reality.
Well, it was an honor. It was an honor speaking with you. I love your book collections. I'm looking forward to seeing the journal you were talking about, and I hope we talk again.
Yeah, you too. I think it was a pleasure to talk to you, and I enjoyed our conversation immensely. It was entertaining and educational as well.
Thank you, Jesper. Hey, could you tell us where people can find you if they want to read more from you? Is there a place?
The cheeky answer, that's just type my name in Amazon, and then I think the first 2 or 3 hits will actually be my books. That's the cheeky answer, but
I'll put some links on the podcast description too, so people can find you easier.
Yeah, and then of course the academia page. I think most people, even outside the academic community, knows this academia, this community, Facebook for academics, and you can find me there. And there's a lot of links, and actually I uploaded a couple of sample chapters there as well, so people can read stuff from the academia page.
Good stuff. Taking the time to speak with us, appreciate it. It was a good conversation.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Jesper, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. And there you have it. How'd you like that? I want to thank Jesper for taking the time out to talk with Doug and myself, and I want to thank Doug for taking the time out to talk with Jesper and myself. I'm not going to thank myself. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen, and hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. Got something out of it, especially you, Peter Gilmore. I know you listen, Peter. Don't lie. I know you listen. You don't listen well, but you listen. Make sure you check out Jesper's work, which can be found at academia.edu. Just search Jesper Petersen. It's Petersen. And you can also find Jesper's books on Amazon. Search the same name. Or you can simply follow the links in the podcast description at modernsatanism.net. See how easy that is? Don't forget to check out the Satanic Temple at thesatanictemple.com. See what's going on. There's always something going on there. Who knows what's coming next? And feel free to donate to the cause. Become a member. Join us. Educate the world. Maybe create some change, some positive change along the way. Who knows? The odds are good, though. And make sure you share the podcast. Share it with your friends, neighbors, enemies, people who will be enemies in the future, people who will be friends in the future, people you don't care about. Just share it. Couldn't hurt anything, right? And feel free to support the podcast. You can support the podcast at the modernsatanism.net website. And if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, you can contact your host at the modernsatanism.net website on the contact link. There's a contact link there, and you can contact me through that and make suggestions. I'd also like to present a invitation to anyone who has any Satanists, I should say, who have any content that they would like to provide for the show. I'll play it. I'll put it in, throw it in the mix, as long as it's decent, So if you've been thinking about doing something, you're not quite sure, you want a podcast, a small spot maybe, go ahead, send it to me. You can use the contact link on the modernsatanism.net website to get more details if you need them, where to send it, all that good stuff. Yeah, I'd be happy to include it, because I know there's some people that, they want to do something, they want to make a statement, they want to be heard, but they don't have a outlet for that, or they're not interested in doing a podcast every week. they don't know how to do a body count, whatever. I'll help you get over that hurdle. It'd be my pleasure to do so. I'm here for you. You have been listening to the Modern Satanism Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, ask for money back. I'll give you double your money back. Guaranteed. Okay. I'll see you on the next podcast. I'm not sure what it's going to be. Probably a collage of different things. Who knows? Maybe we'll talk to somebody from San Antonio if we get lucky. All right. Remember, hail Satan.